Okay, so we're going to look at section 4.6 on fermentation. So some stuff to think about. Excuse me. We are air-breathing organisms and we use oxygen to release chemical energy from the food we eat. But what if there isn't oxygen? What happens when you hold your breath and dive underwater or use up oxygen so quickly that you can't replace it fast enough? Do your cells simply stop working? And what about microorganisms that live in places where oxygen isn't available? Is there a pathway that allows cells to extract energy from food in the absence of oxygen? And you lucky ducks, there is. Hence why we get to go over fermentation. I know, you are very excited. Okay, here we go. Fermentation allows glycolysis to continue. Recall earlier from in the chapter that there are two benefits to glycolysis. One, produce ATP quickly, and two, it doesn't require oxygen. However, when a cell generates a large amount of ATP from glycolysis, it runs into a problem. In just a few seconds, all of the cell's available NAD molecules are filled up with electrons. Without oxygen, that electron transport chain, as you know, will not run. So there's nowhere for the NADH molecule to deposit their electrons. They're just hanging out. Thus, NADH does not get converted back to NAD, and without NAD, the cell can't keep glycolysis going, and ATP production stops. And that's where the process of fermentation comes in. When oxygen is not present, glycolysis is followed by a pathway that makes it possible to continue ATP without oxygen. Keep in mind, it's not going to create ATP, but fermentation allows glycolysis to continue going. So in the absence of oxygen, fermentation releases energy from food molecules by producing ATP. During fermentation, cells convert NADH to NAD by passing high-energy electrons back to the pyruvic acid. This action converts NADH back into the electron carrier, NAD, allowing glycolysis to produce a steady supply of ATP. So fermentation is an anaerobic process. So therefore, it's going to occur when oxygen is not available for cellular respiration. We went over this a couple sections ago. And fermentation, again, does not produce ATP, but allows for glycolysis to continue going. So there are two slightly different kind of tracks or processes that occur. You either have alcoholic fermentation or you get lactic acid fermentation. So we're going to talk about lactic acid first and then we're going to talk about alcoholic fermentation first, and then lactic acid, which is a little bit out of order from what the book does. So here's just a picture of fermentation. Again, it's anaerobic, meaning it doesn't use oxygen, that allows glycolysis to go. And this is kind of what I showed you guys a couple sections ago. So fermentation, alcoholic fermentation. It's going to be similar to lactic acid that we're going to talk about secondly. So yeast and a few other organisms use alcoholic fermentation, which produces ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide. Alcoholic fermentation is used to produce, obviously, alcoholic beverages. But it's also a process that causes bread dough to rise. When yeast cells in dough run out of oxygen, the dough begins to ferment, giving off tiny bubbles of carbon dioxide. These bubbles form the air spaces you see in a slice of bread. The small amount of alcohol produced in the dough evaporates when the bread is baked, so you're not actually taking in any alcohol per se when you have a sandwich. So with alcoholic fermentation, glycolysis splits the glucose and the products enter fermentation. Energy from the NADH splits that pyruvic acid into basically alcohol and carbon dioxide. So you get, when you look down here, you have your glucose, you go through glycolysis, you get your two pyruvic acids. So your products, this isn't on the board, so you might want to write this down. Your products, if you were to write an equation of alcoholic fermentation after glycolysis, you would want to write pyruvic acid plus NADH, and then do this little arrow thing also known as a yield. So your products are your reactants are pyruvic acid plus NADH, and then yields alcohol plus carbon dioxide, or CO2, plus NADH. So here are our reactants are right here, and our products are these three things. So make sure that equation is in your book. So going back to lactic acid, most organisms carry out fermentation using a chemical reaction that converts pyruvic acid into lactic acid. Unlike alcoholic fermentation, lactic acid does not give off carbon dioxide. However, like alcoholic fermentation, lactic acid fermentation also regenerates NAD+, so that glycolysis can continue. Certain bacteria, certain bacteria that produce lactic acid as a waste product during fermentation are important to the industry. For example, prokaryotes are used in the production of a wide variety of food and beverages, such as cheese, yogurt, buttermilk, sour cream, to which the acid contributes the familiar sour taste. Remember, they always say like they're good bacteria in yogurt, so if you're having problems with your digestive system, sometimes your doctor will say, oh, make sure you're having probiotic or good bacteria. Yogurt is typically one that you get. And also pickles, sauerkraut, they're also producing the prokaryotes. The prokaryotes are the good bacteria using lactic acid formation. Humans, here's a good one, humans are lactic acid fermenters. During brief periods without oxygen, many cells in our body are capable of producing ATP by lactic acid fermentation. The cells are best adapted to do that. However, the muscle cells are often use very large supplies of ATP for rapid bursts of energy. If you guys have ever gone running, whether you're running on a basketball court, out on the ice rink, and all of a sudden you get like a cramp and it hurts, that cramp is actually lactic acid buildup. So back to review all of this. So lactic acid fermentation occurs in muscle cells, hence why we get cramps when we run. Glycolysis again is going to split the two pyruvic acids, and here is our lactic acid equation. I'm going to do the same thing I did before and give you guys the equation. So the lactic acid fermentation equation is this. It's pyruvic acid plus NADH right here yields lactic acid and NAD. Okay, so you get the reactants are NADH and pyruvic acid, and the products are lactic acid and NADH. So as I mentioned earlier, it's used in food production, which is why your book goes on to talk about yogurt, cheese, and bread, and alcoholic beverages. So that's all there is for section 4.6. Hopefully you got some good notes. Always double check your book if you have questions, and bring questions into class so I can answer them. Your test is on Wednesday. Have a good day, guys.